Hello friends! There are many incredible brushes that come pre-installed with Procreate, and we're going to explore some of them. In this video, I'm going to try the Freycinet brush. To find this brush, we're going to head to the brush library, go down to the drawing section, and select Freycinet. As usual, I haven't made any changes in the brush studio. I'm going to be using the brush exactly as it was installed. First, we're going to check out the brush behaviors, keeping in mind that my canvas is set to 3000 pixels square at 300 dpi. So if you're working on a different size canvas, the brush strokes might appear slightly different for you. Okay, let's start with a stroke test at a pretty small size. I've got this set to 2%, and that's actually thicker than I expected. So I'm going to drop it all the way down to 1% to see. Okay, yes, so you can get a really fine line with this brush at the smallest size. All right, so I'm going to increase the brush size and then bump it up even more. And it gets really large really quickly, and we're not even at the largest size. So let me bump it all the way up to the largest size. So yeah, you get a lot of coverage with this brush, even with just one stroke. So this brush offers a huge range of sizes. So at the small sizes, the color is pretty solid. There's a slightly rough edge to the strokes, but nothing too major. You definitely start to see quite a lot of texture here at these larger sizes. It looks like this brush is tapered and possibly pressure sensitive, so let's take a look at that. So yes, it's definitely pressure sensitive. So with less pressure, you get a lighter color and a smaller stroke. And then with more pressure, you get a darker color and a thicker stroke. Now this is with the brush set fairly small. I'm curious to see what happens when the brush is set to a larger size. Okay, so you start out with a regular stroke and then you lose definition pretty quickly when the brush is set to a large size. All right, let's do an opacity test. So I'm just going to layer on a few colors to see what happens. So clearly this brush is low opacity. You can see right through these swatches. So here I layered a dark color over light, and the transparency isn't that obvious, but there is a slight shift in color. And of course here, if I layer a light color over dark, the transparency is much more obvious, and you can basically see right through it. But you can get more solid coverage if you just add more and more layers of color. Of course, the downside of that is that you lose the texture. Okay, now I'm going to switch my pencil grip to see if anything changes. So I've got my pencil at an angle and I'm holding it pretty far back and really loosely. So I'm just going to overlap a few color swatches to see if I see a difference. And actually, this is kind of interesting. You see how it looks like the ink is pooling at the edges of the strokes? See right there, it's a lot darker. That's an interesting feature. So as I overlap here, I'm not seeing a significant difference. Maybe the colors are a bit lighter when I hold the pencil at this angle. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with a regular grip to compare the two. So it's a little darker, but the change in grip doesn't make a huge difference. You can still see that quality of pooling ink along the edges, but that effect is more obvious in that earlier test. Now let's try blending with the smudge tool. I'm just going to put down a few layers of color here. And I'm going to try to see if I can make a gradient. So I'm going to switch to the smudge tool. And I'm going to set it to a medium size. Let's see what happens. No, that's a fail. So it really is not blending the color, it's just kind of making a muddy mess. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to see what happens if I increase the size of the smudge tool. Not really any improvement here. It might work to create some kind of textured background, but in terms of blending, yeah, it's a fail. All right, since I can get a pretty small size with this brush, I'm going to use it for my sketch. And as you saw in the thumbnail, I'm drawing lemons in this video, so I hope it won't be too difficult to see this yellow on camera. And as I'm sketching with it, I'd say this brush has an inky quality to it when you use it at this small size. It's easy to sketch with, but it doesn't feel like a pencil at all. It definitely feels more like ink. So I've increased the brush size to fill the shape with color. And I quite like this inky, sketchy quality, so I'm gonna try not to cover that up too much. Now at a larger size, this brush does give you some nice texture, so I do like that quite a lot. Oops. But it can be a little tricky to control when it's too large. So I'm finding it easier to outline the shape at a smaller size and then bump up the brush size to fill with that textured color. Now, since you can get so much coverage with this brush, it makes it really easy to add shading with just a few simple strokes. So I'm just going to go through adjusting the brush size as I need to add the first pass of my shadows. Okay, so my brush size was too large again, and although I like this soft feathery edge it creates, that's not what I want for this drawing, so I need to reduce the size again. And I can see that this is one of those brushes that will probably need constant size adjustment depending on what you're drawing and what kind of look you're trying to achieve. Okay, I'm just going in with a darker color to deepen the shadows in some areas. And with this slightly darker color, you're really seeing that texture. And now at a much smaller size, I can bring back some of that inky, sketchy quality for some of the details. Here I'm adding a few highlights with a lighter yellow, and I'm just going over that area with a few more strokes to make it more opaque and easier to see. And I'm doing the same here as well. Okay, onto the leaves. Geez, I keep forgetting to drop my brush size. So I'm going to use the same method of outlining with a smaller size. It's easier to control, and then increasing the size to fill with color. Okay, so here I started filling with a slightly smaller brush size, and I noticed that because the brush is kind of semi-transparent, I'm getting that overlapping. So that's something to be mindful of, especially if that's not a look that you like or that you want. All right, back to a really small size so that I can create a more inky feel with these stems, but also so I can get these really small details. And I do like that I don't have to switch to a different brush to do this. It's nice to have a brush with this much flexibility. Here I am back to big broad strokes for a looser, more painterly approach on these leaves. This transparent quality is great because I'm layering this dark color over light, but you can still see the light color showing through below. Now, since this brush can get so large, it might work well for adding a textured background. So I'm going to increase the size of the brush and choose a really dark color and see what happens. Okay, so it gives a lot of really great texture. That pooling ink quality is showing up really nicely. And I love the feathery edges as well. Now you can see that dark color right through this yellow because it's so textured and semi-transparent. So I think I need to underpaint those areas. So I'm going to create a new layer above the background layer. and choose a really light yellow. And I'm just going to add a little bit of an underpainting in those areas. Now, there are still a few small areas where the green is showing through, but I really don't mind that. It just felt a little too significant in these areas, so that layer of underpainting makes quite a difference. So the last detail I'm going to add is a little more texture on the rind. So I've got my brush size pretty small, but I don't want really defined dots or shapes. So I'm just adding some marks, some really light random marks. And I'm using more of the edge of the Apple Pencil versus the point. And I'm keeping the pressure really light. So these are going to be super subtle because I don't want it to look like I've got polka dot lemons. Okay, Freycinet final thoughts. This brush basically has two personalities. You've got the dense, inky version, which works well for sketching and details. Then you've got the big, loose, textured, semi-opaque version, which works well for a more painterly approach. The good thing is the two personalities don't clash. I think they can work really well together to give a beautiful result. Now, using the smudge tool with this brush is pretty pointless, but I found I didn't really even need it. So what do you guys think about Freycinet? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and let me know how you use it if this is one of your go-to brushes. And by the way, I've left a link in the description for you if you'd like to see more videos in this brush review series. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.